Welcome. This is Fearless Security, the Basics. You have nothing to fear but fear itself, and I'm Fred Cohen. Basically, Fearless Security came into existence because people are using fear to sell security. And at some point, you need to start replacing that fear with reason. And, the sale of security through fear has a sound psychological basis, and it works really well in terms of selling, but it doesn't work all that well in terms of making good decisions. The basic fear cycle that people use is they propose more protection, which is very often not funded by the decision makers or by the customers or potential customers. And then bad things happen. And at this point, instead of making rational security decisions regarding the bad things that happened, they typically place blame on the stuff that was unfunded, whatever they didn't get paid to do. This then justifies the emergency purchase of services and or products and or changes in operational modalities, even though it very often is unrelated to the events. And then we go around the cycle again. We propose more, not funded, and so forth. So that's sort of the fear cycle. And breaking the fear cycle really means that we need to start making rational decisions before events and carrying them out. During events, we need to have something in place to allow us to make good decisions. And then after events, so that we're not, again, returning to that cycle. So then, of course, the question is, how did we accomplish this? Basically, here's an example of fear. A trio of researchers uncovered 25 security vulnerabilities related to SCADA systems. This was up on ThreadPost, followed by the names of the hunters and the slow release one after another of these vulnerabilities, sort of keeping that fear, going over time. Here's an approach to reason. All systems and software have vulnerabilities. So if we're protected at an architectural level, it won't matter that there are all these minor vulnerabilities. But the question is that really reason or is that rationalization? And the truth is, it might matter that these particular vulnerabilities are showing up right now, depending on your situation and other things in the environment. And the resolution to this is to take a systematic approach and adapt to changing conditions. But what we don't want to do is get in a race with the vulnerabilities. So regardless of what rational decision process we have, if we end up in a race with the vulnerabilities, where every time somebody comes out with a vulnerability, we have to rush to do something about it, that's going to be a big problem now and in the future. So the resolution of these issues comes from science. And I don't mean to imply that protection is currently a science, but science is sort of the thing that differentiates rationalization from reason. And if you think of it, rationalization is really a theory. Right? We hypothesize that all systems and software have vulnerabilities. We hypothesize that architectural protection will deal with those issues. But reason allows you to test the theories before you adopt them. So you have to ask yourself, are these things actually true? Now, I'll tell you that the long history of information protection says that so far, all systems and all software have vulnerabilities. And frankly, there's no horizon today for this to end. There's no sense that we're going to have the perfect system anytime in the foreseeable future. But that doesn't mean that all these vulnerabilities produce negative consequences. So the next question in this justification, this rational view of the rationalization, is the question of whether architecture can save us. And sort of the answer today is it might. There are some architectural structures that are demonstrably effective against large classes of attack mechanisms. And we'll give you some examples of those later on, but I'll just start with one here. There's this digital or some call it a data diode. And what it does is force information to flow only one way. So for example, and this is a physical mechanism, so you can't defeat it by any programming or anything you do other than physical alteration of the structures in place. And of course, you have to have things to protect that physicality as well. So what you can do with that, for example, is if you have some data collection process, you can assure that you can't alter the data collection process by the mechanisms used to do the analysis if you put a diode going from the collection to the analysis. So no matter what you do in analysis, it won't change the collection process. And there are lots of places you can use this, for example, in industrial control systems. And so now, depending on the specifics of the vulnerabilities and the architecture and the way it operates, it may be very effective. I mean, there's basically nothing you can do from that analysis station to affect the collection of information. There are other circumstances. For example, these vulnerabilities, somebody has a way to telnet into port 25 and alter the way the web server operates to change the operation of the system and give themselves root access. Well, if they can't reach it, they can't make that alteration. So architecturally, I can limit the ability of different reachability from different locations to restrict the ability to expose that vulnerability. Some people call this attack surface. So you essentially can use a firewall to reduce the attack surface on the weaker systems inside, delay the need to immediately repair every minor vulnerability that somebody comes across with, and allow yourself some time to do reasonable change control. The thing is, we need to analyze this against some scientific methodology in order to find out what's really going to work. So this is the outline. How do we make rational security decisions? How does Fearless do it? Because this is about Fearless Security, our organization. And then a discussion. So the basis of decision making is, it turns out there are a lot of different facets to making decisions. And this has been widely studied for a long time. And you can see a list of different things here that have to do with the characteristics of strategic protection related decision making. And so that's strategic, but they're also tactical decisions. And the tactical decisions have different characteristics. So one of the things to understand is that you need to recognize and organize for the decision-making characteristics associated with the sorts of decisions being made. And I'll give you some example of strategic protection decisions. We organize our analysis framework into something like 100, 104 right now, strategic elements, most of which are decisions. And they're decisions between limited set of alternatives. So, notionally, you don't make decisions between an unlimited range of possibilities in information protection because you don't have an unlimited number of alternatives. You either have a firewall or not. You can have different things in your firewall or not, but you can't turn a dial that has unlimited range from completely off to completely on. There are usually only a few choices, it turns out. So if you have a limited number of choices and factors, then that makes it easier. The information, in fact, needed to make those decisions is then very limited. So instead of collecting all the information about everything you can think of in your environment and creating an enormous analysis platform, very often you have a limited amount of information you need to understand the decision, and you can make it very quickly and very simply. Typically, these decisions require high-level situational knowledge, and that means 3 to 5 people within the organization are going to be involved who are, typical organizations have small numbers of people who have a great deal of knowledge and the ability to make key decisions. So we found that 3 to 5 people is almost always optimal for a rapid process. Of course, every organization is different, so you can't just create a checklist. And then you have reasons for making choices. And these reasons aren't always science. These might be reasons associated with the organizational structure or the manner in which the organization tends to operate, or the particular situation. You might not have enough finances to do what you'd really like to do in terms of protection. So we prefer science, but sometimes we use rationalization because it's the only thing available. But even when we do that, we really need to test for refutation. So almost any decision we make should be challenged internally or potentially externally just to get a sense of what the limitations of it are. So what we've developed is a standard of practice. It's not a standard in the sense of a list of rules you have to follow. It's a standard of practice in the sense that we practice helping other people do protection, and we need some methodological, some systematic way to practice so that we don't forget things, and so that we make pretty much the same decision in the same circumstance, subject to conditions. And so I just want to point out, for example, that airline pilots use checklists, and it's not because they don't know how to fly. It's because they found out that people make mistakes, and we've known this for a long time. But But basically, in order to avoid the mistakes that cause crashes, they started to use checklists. And the more they use these checklists and the more consistently they use them, the fewer crashes they have. And so, fairly recently, the same sort of approach was applied to doctors. So they created checklists for doctors performing medical procedures and making decisions in the medical arena. And what they found is they get fewer mistakes from doctors. And doctors are people too. Nobody's perfect. So what we find is that by creating the standard of practice and a set of criteria for making decisions, we get better, faster, cheaper decisions. All three, which is a rarity in this world. So how do we do this? Well, we use people that know what they're doing. They have skills. They've done this for a long time. We give them tools to help them do that. A peer review process that we use fairly heavily to make sure both that the people participating continue to understand what's going on, but also to make sure that we're not presenting bad decisions. And we try to adapt this to the client reality over time and as needed. And by the way, all the details of this are available online, and I'll just show you how to get to it. You go to all.net, just take you directly to all.net. You click on protection from the menu, and this is the overarching model that we use of the protection process. And you can choose a standard of practice, for example, protection, enterprise protection. And it has all the elements of the decision-making process, like incident handling, how do you handle incidents? And it provides the set of options and the basis. And in the case of some of these standards, like the industrial control systems, you'll get very specific things having to do with SCADA controls and placements, and you have the options and the basis for making a decision of what to put where in different circumstances, and then the description of what all these things mean and how they operate. So that should give you a sense that we're dedicated to making this information available to all, and we welcome all to use and comment on this. We want to foster public comment because we want to improve the standard of practice and we want to help others do as well as they can. And again, recognizing that we want rational decision making, not decisions based on fear. There are some separation of duties issues that are sort of fundamental to these issues. And I wanted to bring this up within the context of the tool that we use to do this work. This is an internal tool that we use. And what happens is you have alternatives. For example, this is about the security lead and what they can do, whether they can specify, examine, and manage, or in this case, we'll call it operate protection all at the same time. And for the purposes of separation of duties, it's a bad idea to have the same person specify what's to be done, verify that it's been done, and do it. and the reason is that then they can specify and examine and lie about or fail to see the reality of what's happening in their environment. You need independent people with proper expertise to review what people are doing as the consequences go up. So there are various options in place of how you can do this and the different aspects of this particular decision. And there are different circumstances. For example, if the risk is high, then we say no individual may do more than one of specify, perform, or verify the same element. And we talk here, for example, about policy, control standards, procedures, and so forth. And this is just a chart that we use to fill in how those duties are put in place and what the rules are and how it works in your particular situation. So this separation of duties is just one of, like I say, more than 100 elements of the standard of practice. And you can see them on the screen. And we move through looking at different issues over time. So that's basically how we do rational security decision making at the level of a structure to do it. Now, you can't just do this in a vacuum and be effective at it. So in particular, we support scientific research. Fearless Security is a division of Management Analytics, and Management Analytics does research and development as part of our forensics work, as part of technology licensing. And we operate the all.net website and affiliated companies. And team members that we're working with are, they work for government organizations, private enterprises of all sorts, universities, educational institutions. They do peer review for research journals and conferences. and they participate in the community in a variety of ways. And the point here is that we're dedicated to community involvement and to doing research and development, not just sort of taking what somebody else did and trying to imagine that we know how that is. Um, we have some specific techniques that we use. We have independent expertise. We don't want to rely on a vendor. We don't want to have any affiliation with a vendor. We Many of our people are industry analysts or members of the press in one form or another, although they certainly aren't going to be publishing any of the information from our clients to anybody. Um, so they're all in these independent positions, so they're not dedicated to making something happen, and they won't lean one way or another. We work for our clients, and we work as a team with a very strong internal peer review process. So internally, it's not just that the standard of practice is reviewed, it's that everything we do is reviewed. If I go and do some work for somebody and write up a draft report, we review it internally, and we have arguments, disagreements, discussions until we come to some reasonable decision about what the really right thing to do is. And we also have external review of the standard of practice. So we have people from various industries that have worked in the field for a long time review elements of the standard of practice to help us make sure we get it right. And of course, we also participate in NIST and the ICS ISAC conferences, journals. We have an active response process to fear-based security in the social media. We've sort of decided that we've had enough of fear-mongering, and we're going to go out and tell people this is a fear-based approach and there's no real justification for it if we find that to be true. And we're going to try and find the real basis for these decisions and make them available to everybody. And we feel that that's very important for society as a whole, and certainly for the information protection field. We have tools. You've seen briefly JDM. That's our collection and analysis support tool. We have a variety of other special purpose tools that we use for analysis, for helping to make better decisions. But we also have people. And tools are just tools. We don't have tools that automate all the decisions. We have tools that help people that understand the situation make better decisions more quickly and more effectively, and allow us to question ourselves in a reasoned way. At this point, I just want to engage the audience in discussions, and thank you for your participation. So any questions or discussions? Let's go.